So I'm going to dig straight in and I'm going to skip the intro since we just did it. But today, I honestly just want to talk about what are the myths with culturally responsive teaching and just give you guys some strategies that you can use, especially with back to school being right around the corner. And then we're going to end with a call to action. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop it in the chat and I'll definitely leave some time at the end to answer your questions as well. But I'm going to dig in the chat. Please drop an emoji or a word that reflects your cultural story. And as you're thinking about this emoji or this word that reflects who you are and your experiences, I'll share mine. For me, it's alchemy. I feel like my life has been a celebration of everything that I've been through from um, being born in Panama to migrating to America to learning different cultures, pero también understanding who I am as an Afro Latina and ensuring that because I'm trying to preserve my own culture, that does not mean that I'm going to look down on everyone else's cultures, right? Normally, when I give sessions about culturally responsive, sustained education, I try to be as forthright with saying that in order for you to accept diversity and accept everyone else for who they are as individuals, you have to first learn how to accept yourself. So, once again, if you have a time in the chat, and I'll look at the chat now. Empathetic, I see this, okay. I see some muscles, I see feet. I'm thinking that's more of like a passage and an experience from Maya. Immigrant grandparents from Ireland and Norway. Thank you, Judith. Helpful, colorful, patience. Yes. And I know for some of you, if you can't really think of a word, but your family has migrated, think of kind of like the word bridge, right? This connection between not only two worlds, but the differences in cultures. If you've ever seen a highway, you know that there's so many different paths that lead us to where we are today. And that's exactly what culturally responsive sustaining education is all about. So thank you for sharing, but I'm going to dig in because I know we only have about 30 minutes. So culturally responsive teaching focuses on recognizing and respecting your students, right? Their diverse backgrounds, their experiences, and taking all of what makes our students unique and creating an environment where they can thrive, they feel seen, and they feel heard. And for some of us, we struggle with understanding what culturally responsive teaching is because over the years, especially during COVID, people have put kind of like a negative connotation to what culturally responsive teaching is. But I'm here to say it's as simple as honoring who people are. And the best way that we can do it, especially as educators, whether you are a teacher, whether you are an ed tech specialist, whether you are a tech specialist, or an administrator, is by creating experiences or lesson plans that reflect the students that are in our classrooms, whether it's a direct reflection of their cultures or just their learning styles, right? I think I've heard someone the other day say learning styles don't exist. And I had to remind them, I'm the type of person that if you give me a lecture, you lost me. But if you show me how to do something, right? If I can touch it myself, if I can see you do it in front of me, I can take notes and I'm able to replicate that learning experience. Well, guess what? Those are how we learn. That's diversity. That's also me and my experiences as an immigrant. I had to learn a lot of things hands on in order to teach my mom how to do it as well. So, for those of you who haven't read this book, or even if you've had, Zaretta Hammond talks about the idea that in order for us to teach students something new, it has to be accompanied by something that they've already experienced, right? Information or knowledge that has already been learned. So, what I want you to think about is there a gap, or can you name one gap that you've noticed impacts your students' identity or voice? And if you can't really think about it, I want you to dig deep into what our curriculums currently look like. Or when you're choosing a specific ed tech platform to use, what is it that you're looking for the most? I know personally, in order for me to use an ed tech platform, and when I kind of like check the box of accessibility, I normally think, can this be translated for other languages, but also other dialects? What does this look like in a classroom in Mexico versus a classroom in the United States? What does it look like in a classroom in Panama versus a classroom in Singapore? So, what are some gaps that you believe you've noticed that impacts your students' identity or voice? Also, think storytelling. I learn best when someone gives me examples that are tied to who I am, right? So I had students, and I'll give you some more examples after this, but I've had students in my classroom who started their own businesses. And I would say, okay, well, how does this tie into what you're currently doing with your business? Most of my examples, especially as a history teacher, would align to what my students are currently doing. That way, they can see that there's some importance to it, but it's reflective of who they are as individuals. So I'm going to go to the chat real quick and pause. And math, I think I was reading something. In math, a lot of the word problems are contextual situations that are not relevant or relatable. Correct. Thank you, Christopher. We have many students that speak Haitian Creole, and there are a few apps that translate to Haitian Creole. Yes, Joseph. And if you've ever tried using Immersive Reader, I would say that's awesome to use, and you can actually use it on any platform. BIPOC examples, young women as adolescent girls examples. Thank you, Tara. All of those were great examples of some gaps that we've noticed, right? And so think about it this way. If the cultural lens is absent, meaning their experiences, their traditions, the things that they like to do, if that is absent in a curriculum or a lesson plan or an activity, there's no neurological bridge for deep learning. The brain is not making any kind of connection. And so that's why some of our students are disconnected with what's being taught, regardless of how fun the tech is or the curriculum may be, or how much time you spent during the weekend creating that lesson plan. There's going to be a disconnect because they don't see themselves in what's being taught. And thank you all for sharing. So what does it look like in practice? So we just read about, in math, right? So I think my first example is actually spot on and perfect. So think about a math lesson that uses hair braiding patterns to street vending prices, right? That's going to tap directly into the cultural schema and instantly help students feel relevant. When I was an assistant principal of an expeditionary learning school in Brooklyn, one of my students actually braided hair and she was struggling with math. And I just kept trying to have her think about not only the patterns, but think about the angles, right? So if we're thinking about math and angles and how much hair are you going to use for a specific braid, is there a pattern that you have to kind of like remember to go across the entire head, right? But also, hair braiding is generational knowledge, it's passed down techniques, and it could easily be related to math. If I'm going to talk about migration or food traditions, of course, I'm tying that into storytelling because now we're helping students make that connection with their own memory, right? I always say the best kind of conversations that I have with my friends via the phone is when not only when we're throwing shade, obviously, but when they have something really good, like I call it juicy information to tell me. It's kind of like the way that we share information with our friends. Guess what? Some of our students want information shared that same exact way, right? Whether you are one of those educators who are overly hyperactive like me, or you love poetry, please share it with your students in a way that is going to bring relevance, but they're going to feel like, dang, this teacher really took their time out to explain it to me in a way that it makes sense. And then also using Afro-Caribbean proverbs. So I was born in Panama. So I use a lot of Panamanian idioms like eso pa. And obviously that just means you can say what's up or what happened, right? And when it's usually tied into a classroom lesson, especially if the student is Hispanic or if you're trying a Spanglish phrase, it fosters kind of like this rapport with students, right? And it automatically helps us to remember something that was connected to that. Like I know whenever I'm around my family members and they like we embrace and they're like, hey, guess what, Immediately I feel this sense of I'm in my community, I'm around my people, right? And so it doesn't necessarily have to be an Afro-Caribbean proverb, but think about who your students are. So if they do speak Haitian Creole, is there a phrase in Haitian Creole that might trigger kind of like this memory to your students of, oh, this is how things were home on a positive note, right? So we have to remember not to re-trigger trauma, but I believe that students feel seen when we kind of like take the step or the extra steps to know more about their own cultures. I always tie this back to Sankofa. If you're new to this, this is an African concept, meaning we should retrieve things that we value from our past knowledge. I also have this tattoo on my back. I've visited and done so many speaking engagements in Ghana last year, but it's the idea that there's no future without us learning from our past, right? When we are raising our kids, we normally say, don't put your hand in the fire because it's hot, right? And then we try to like show, oh, this is hot. But it's the idea of I need you to learn from my mistakes so that you can do better than I can, or you can be better than I was before. So I want to do this activity because I know time is of the essence. And so I'm speaking fast for two reasons. The first is because I'm Panamanian. So you know when I get excited. But the second, I'm from Brooklyn, y'all. So of course, the New Yorker in me is like, we got to get this done. So I want to do this activity called Reclaim and Remix. I want you to think about a moment in your own schooling where your identity was either uplifted or erased. How does that memory influence how you show up for your students today? So I'm actually going to help you with this. And I want you to write in a chat using one sentence. Because I experienced blank, I now blank. Because I experienced blank, I now blank. And I'll go back to what it is that you're reclaiming. I want you to think back to a moment in your own schooling where your identity was either uplifted or erased. How does that memory influence how you show up for students today? And I'm going to check the chat, but it's because I experienced blank, I now blank. Oh yes, Stacy. So we tattoo sisters. Sankofa shows the significance of learning history. Yes, yes. Because I experienced silence, I now amplify all voices. Wow. Thank you, Stormy. Because I experienced racism. Oh, this chat is going. I can't even state. Because I experienced racism, I now am more culturally responsive to my students. Thank you for sharing, Tara. Because I experienced teachers trying to dim my light, now I empower my students to use their voice and express themselves. I love that. Oh, okay, we're definitely going to have to save this chat because I'm definitely going to have to read all of these. But I love this. And this is also a reflective process that I use because they normally say when we become teachers, we teach the way we were taught. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we appreciated how we were taught. I have shared in so many instances how my entire K-12 experience was with me being in an ESL classroom. Although I migrated to the United States when I was 3, English is not my first language, but is my dominant language. And I just felt like the schools took the easy way out. They looked at my first name and last name, realized my mom never, signed me out of ESL and was just like, okay, we're going to keep pushing her through. But then when I became a teacher, I realized, wow, schools actually got more money because of the fact that I was an ESL student. But no one thought to take that experience and kind of like help me to do something else with being in ESL, right? Maybe I would have been really good at teaching other students while I was in there. Maybe I would have been really good at sharing my experiences with students while I was in there so that when they do transition out, it's kind of like, well, Jadisa shared this with me, right? So because I experience isolation, because that's how I felt, I now find ways to help students explore who they are. All right, and that's just me. I experienced a lot of isolation as an ESL student, but we know being multilingual and being an English as a second language learner is not a challenge, right? It shouldn't be a challenge. It shouldn't be a deficit. It is my strength. It is like, no, I know this is like so cliche. It is definitely my superpower. Thank you all for sharing. I'm definitely going to visit the chat after. So, this pushes us into the idea of centering happiness and creativity in the curriculum. If you've read Cultivating Genius, which is this book right here by Goldie Muhammad, she talks about the learning pursuits, but in that first book, she only talks about four, right? So, identifying who you are and who your students are, thinking about the skills that's necessary, whether if it's literacy, numeracy, critical thinking, that's also aligned to a standard, does not matter what you are teaching. Then intellect, this deep knowledge, building inquiry, and then criticality, understanding that power, justice, and equity is important. Well, in the second book, she says, well, we have to center joy. None of this matters if we're not centering the happiness and the well-being and learning for each of our students. What I want you guys to think about right now, especially from all around the world, is what if our students being exposed to? Beyond TikTok, they're being exposed to war, they're being exposed to famine, they're being exposed to our rights being stripped away, right? And so the classroom has to be this place of, I want you to be happy, I want you to voice your perspective, but I also want you to thrive in creativity while I'm checking up on you. I want to know if you are okay. And it's not hard as an educator or as an adult to take a pause and say, are you okay? What can I help you with today? So, what makes a lesson plan culturally responsive? There's four aspects, and y'all see that I'm going to start speeding up a bit. The first is incorporating students' cultural backgrounds. So, think about your students' traditions, languages, histories, and experiences. Please do not wait until Hispanic Heritage Month. Please do not wait until the Independence Day of someone's country or Black History Month to then say, I want to learn more about your culture. And please, and I'm going to say this very loud for the folks in the back, do not create these cultural awareness days where there's only one day out of the month that we get to learn about who our students are. I believe that when school begins, the first couple of weeks should be aligned with exploring who our students are, but learning more about their experiences. How did each student find their way to your classroom? Like literally, did they take the bus? Did they take the train? Did they get dropped off? All of that impacts how your student is in your classroom. Do they feel welcome? Do they feel threatened? Right? Have they eaten the night before? The second, inclusive and diverse content. Your material should represent all the perspectives and voices, even if they challenge your own voice. I've heard some teachers start their, school year off by saying, "Well, I'm your teacher and this is my classroom." No, you should be the facilitator. You should be a part of the audience. It is their classroom, it is their community, it is their space, and they should have the freedom to voice their opinions in your classroom without disrespecting each other. The third, culturally relevant teaching strategies. I normally get asked this a lot from schools and districts that I work with, which is, what does this even look like in the classroom? Right. So I would say a lot of community based projects, storytelling, cooperative learning experiences where you're creating opportunities for students to actually collaborate together. I used to love having my students act things out. So if I was teaching a moment in history, they would then have to kind of like become a character for that from that era and present themselves and their findings. And then I used to do a lot of rap battles. And for my students who didn't like rap, I would say, well, turn this into a poetry slam. And if not, this can be a spoken word, right? Because I wanted them to understand that our essays, because there's a lot of essays in history, our essays are literally just some lyrics on a piece of paper. And then critical consciousness and social justice. How is your lesson tied to what our students are experiencing now? And that's a question that I believe every educator and administrator should be asking themselves, regardless of the subject area. So this is an example of a strategy that you can use, especially for the beginning of your lesson. We know the beginning of your lesson should be the lesson's hook. Um, it doesn't matter if you teach math or science. There should be some relevant text that you can find from your own background or that of your students. And then create an opening activity or a question or a prompt that you know is going to not only spark curiosity, but open up the floor for debate. So here's an example. I don't know if you've read the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. I have, but I did this with some students in California, some high school students, and I asked, what does freedom mean to you? And I wanted them not only to be able to write their response, but they also had the opportunity to draw, right? Because some of our students are not good with sharing words, but they drew. And then I connected it to Douglass's pursuit of literacy as this basis of what freedom means, right? And this is honestly what we're dealing with now, especially as people of color, is the idea of what can I do today that's going to help me feel the excitement of freedom and the excitement of liberation and the excitement of having access to things that I see someone else having access to. And then I took it a step further and I made a connection to banned books and civil rights and what does it mean to have your rights limited, right? And so there's so many ways that you can hook students in with culturally responsive strategies. And I believe the best ways when you ask a question that there's no right or wrong answer to. I know we have about 7 minutes left, so I'm going to zoom through this so that I can answer any questions you have. This is my cheat sheet. So if you have your phone out, please be sure to take a picture. I would love to hear your thoughts. You can tag me definitely on social. But these are the 8 ways to implement culturally responsive teaching in your classrooms this year. You can remix cultural artifacts, right? So have some students bring some cultural artifacts in, have them presented, and then also align it to the cultures of the communities that they now live in. Student-centered voice. Once again, the teacher should be the facilitator, the onlooker, right? Your students should be the ones directing where the lesson goes, and it's okay if it doesn't go the path of your lesson plan. Please activate prior knowledge. Our students have so much to say. And they've experienced some things that honestly I haven't experienced in my 37 years of living on this earth. So it's always good to hear someone else's experiences and how they might have overcome a challenge or an issue. Explore power dynamics. I think of this as every day someone is taking a different turn at who's going to be the lead in this group work. I used to do the same thing with a lot of my teachers, a lot of the assistant principals that I work with in Brooklyn. It's how are you going to take ownership of this SMART goal that we've created at the beginning of the year? Affirm the lived experiences of your students. Once again, some of us don't even live in the same neighborhoods that our students are coming from. And so we have to respect that what they're going through, especially in 2025, looks totally different than what we've experienced in 2010 and 2016 and 2004. Use identity prompts. This looks different for each culture. So I would say have students create their own identity prompts, right? Very similar to the strategy that we've done before, where you are leaving it open-ended for students to be able to fill it in. Leverage community stories and build critical joy. Joy is the center of everything. Each lesson, no matter how in-depth it is or how boring your students believe the topic is, should be centered in joy. Okay, what I would love for you to do is drop a word or a GIF. Is it a GIF or a GIF? Anyway, a GIF that captures how you're currently feeling. And as you're doing that, here's 2 questions for you to think about.